She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up and she frack. How she grandson to the market for morning, the day is dawning. Forgot a crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cock a crow, dog a bark, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Cock a crow, dog a bark, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. All day a back down, me now a come home. In a jackass yard to fetch a load. Cockle shy hand, bag over shoulder, running by his side. A Rexy and Rover from the farm, them a come. Sun a go down, but up the river. Some washing clothes, some folks are bathing at the water. Fisherman, they catch them a bring from a canoe boat man.
All right. Hey, guess what? Good evening, all of you. My name is Mark Benchap, and welcome to Anansi Web Education. Of course, we have with us the former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, the Honorable David Arthur Granger, is a fixture to this Anansi Web Education. And this week we will be talking about road accidents. And it has been something over the past month or 2 months, horrifying in Guyana, and nobody within the corridors of power, so to speak, seem to have a plan. No one seems to have a plan or any idea as to how they should approach this here. But today we will be talking about that. David Arthur Granger is with us, former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Good evening to you, sir. How are you today?
Thank you for having me on the program again. I'm fine. Thank you. Looking forward to this discussion because it concerns the lives of a lot of young Guyanese. People who are in the prime of their lives are becoming victims of road accidents. So I think it's an important topic today.
Yeah, very important indeed. And as I reflect back at my time out on the quarantine, I kept missing it. And a lot of us as little kids, when we zoom across the road, we keep missing it. I'm missing because of speeding, either Tata buses, speeding Brazilian buses back then, we call it Caio, or speeding cars. Up in the quarantine, they had one of those popular hire car drivers by the name of Star, who drove a Morris Oxford. And I'm not saying that Star was the only one who was speeding, but as a little boy in the quarantine, I just missed it a couple of times. Oh, whoops. You missed it. You just keep missing it. Missed death, that is, by accident. And so it was something that was rampant there on the quarantine during my time, especially on a highway, the 19 road. I'm certain that you're familiar with the 19 road, but back in my time, which was a very, very long time ago, deaths on the number 19 road was almost a regular feature. I remember we were just in maybe the class before common entrance class at Alnis Primary, and we heard the news of about maybe 7 or 8 members of one family. They call them Superman family out at Big Alnis on the quarantine, died as a result of accident on the number 19 road. Every time, for the most part, there is an accident, it's always on the number 19 road. And not so long ago as well, a couple of years back, lots of folks died. But, thankfully, the coalition got into office through your presidency. And you guys saw the need to put lights on both sides of the road, I believe, the number 19 road there. Lights are there now. Prior to that, there wasn't lights. It was very, very dark. So when a cow or a sheep or a goat run across the roadway, there's nowhere to stop, and by the time a driver swerve away, and that's how accident. But I'm glad that you guys had the vision during your presidency to address the issue, starting with number 19 road and lights. Any reflection as you have been growing up on accidents, not just on the quarantine, but in general?
Yes, but because of my experience, I would say that Guyana has been transformed. Naturally, growing up on the quarantine, like you, the roads were really village roads, and it was quite common to see farmers drying paddy on the roadside, or vendors. Sometimes people would spread their, they're selling shrimp or fish or crabs, and you'd see the rice bags spread out actually on the road. At night, the cows would go on the road because it's warm, and of course, a black cow, black road, black night, is the recipe for trouble. During rice harvesting, you would see clumps of mud because the tractors coming out of the rice field would deposit these clumps of mud, and if it's a rainy day, vehicles will be swerving up and down. And after the PNC entered government in 1964, um, around about the time of Republic, there was a lot of important road work between Skeldon and all the way up to Parika. There were a lot of improvements on the road, but because of those improvements, paradoxically, they're becoming more dangerous. So as I look back over, the last, if you allow me to say, the last 70 years, there has been a transformation, but there has also been a marked increase in road deaths. So what has happened is the infrastructure, the engineering of the roads has not kept abreast with the speed of modern vehicles. The roadway is still in the 1950s, passing through villages. There are no rail highways other than Linden Soosdijk Highway. Those are not highways, from 19 Road and from New Amsterdam to Skelder. Those are not highways, or from Vredenhoek to Parika. Those are village roads, and people come out, Saturday afternoon, go drinking, they go hanging out, and unfortunately, the public road has remained as a social gathering point rather than an important lane for modern traffic, and that's been the cause of some of the deaths. So, reflecting on the last, 3/4 of a century or so, I would say that the village roads have not kept abreast with modernity, and that is an adjustment that we still have to make.
And we're looking. You mentioned the highway and so forth. To have these roads away from the villages, it's quite dangerous indeed. How it is right now. But even the Linden Soosdijk Highway, these drivers in modern times seem to think that it's a racetrack, and they race each other. But one of the things that was helpful under the PNC government is that I recall on the Linden Soosdijk Highway, they had 2 toll stations, and those toll stations worked. They were able to reduce speeding drivers or the vehicles and so forth. And I was hoping that at some point in time, good sense will prevail. We can't expect that, at least I can't expect that these days. But good sense will prevail that either they have traffic police on motorcycles who are not corrupt and who are not going to pull vehicles over and collect a bribe, or who are going to pass or turn a blind eye because that particular vehicle pays them off, or whatever the case may be. So I remember those days, and there were very less minimum accidents on the Linden Soosdijk Highway as well.
You're quite right. I may say, I think you're quite right, because the toll stations were not just there to collect money, but they were also bases for highway patrols. And it meant that there were policemen, usually on motorcycles, who would be going up and down to make sure there's no speeding. But with the removal of the toll stations, I get the impression that there are fewer highway patrols and there's less enforcement. And when you look at the situation on the roads, it seems that in the areas that are least policed or with light policing, there are more deaths. And these are long open stretches, and those of us who know Region 6 would know that 19 Road is probably one of the single longest open stretches of straight road in the entire coast. And that's been a scene of speeding. And I think the drivers take advantage of the absence of police highway patrols um, to speed along those ways. And what we need is enforcement.
And that is so true. And there were still the accidents, even though at number 19, they had the toll station there. But as soon as you pass the toll station and you head further up east, the road was very, very dark. There were no lights, no nothing. And no one saw it fit to reduce accidents by, for example, if you know that there are cows lying on the road and the road is very dark, what else do you expect when a driver doesn't see that cow? But thankfully, again, I repeat that the coalition had the vision under your presidency to ensure that there were lights throughout the number 19 highway. Thanks to you guys for doing that. You were able to reduce accidents. Even today, we haven't heard any accident on that highway, not a single accident. Thanks to again for the vision of the coalition in your presidency. Today, Mr. Granger, we want to touch on, and let us just welcome all of our listeners who are now joining us. Good evening and welcome to Anansi Web Education. In October, let's go back since we're dealing with accidents. In October 2007, 10 persons were killed in Amelia's Ward, Linden, that's the upper Demerara, Berbice region. Amelia's Ward, many of you would know that this housing scheme came into existence on the PNC, on the PNC under Forbes Burnham. Some people these days seem to think otherwise, but the evidence is quite clear. And then we move on. In October of 2010, 12 persons were killed. Again, Mr. Granger, look, the number 19 village. This is 2010. We know who were the folks who were in office then. In October 2017, 5 persons were killed at number 59 Village Public Road, East Berbice, Quarantine. As we touch on the subject, our first question, Mr. Granger, what factors have caused most serious fatal road accidents to begin with?
Well, without a doubt, speeding is the single worst contributor or biggest contributor to road deaths. And I don't know that there is a particular way that we can reduce speeding except by law enforcement, because many of the vehicles now could travel at very fast rates of speed. And if there is any obstacle on the road, for example, one of the worst accidents in the quarantine was caused by a pothole, and the driver was going at such a rate that he plunged into the pothole and the entire vehicle was thrown out of the roadway and people died. So speeding is important, and that could be curbed not necessarily by speed bumps, but particularly by highway patrols. And once you have honest policemen sitting on a motorbike waiting on those what I call speed traps, we're likely to reduce the incidence of speeding. And I like to think that if the traffic department put red pins in along the roadways, nowadays you use computers, where most accidents take place, you can see there are long, empty stretches of road. And, this is where people are inclined to speed. There's also the question of drunkenness, drunk driving. And you must be aware that once there is a notorious rum shop or drinking place, particularly during holidays, or maybe there might be horse racing, or there might be some other cricket or some other event, because Guyanese sometimes find every excuse to drink and drink excessively. There must be a way of taking those people off the road, um, by ensuring that when people leave these drinking spots, they're checked and tested quickly before they can do harm. I think those are the two biggest problems: speeding and drunk driving. And if the police could pay more attention to those two offenses, excessive speed and excessive drinking, I think we would go far away in curbing road deaths.
Very far away in curbing road deaths, indeed. Speeding drivers, drivers. The other thing is inexperienced drivers who haven't gone through the correct channels, so to speak, to acquire their license. They pay for it, and so they do not understand how to use the road. That's another serious problem. You did mention, or was it on a previous program, the TPI, the fact that the police, they're used for traffic situation, for example. What is it when you go and you check your vehicles and these sort of things? It should be taken away out of the hands of the police force and put the police back into the streets, not to check a vehicle in terms of uh, you know what I'm talking about, that will put them to do something that is more within their area of expertise, which is to fight crime, and not to check for a vehicle whether it's properly it's fit and these sort of things. That's for another agency to do that. And in terms of the issuing of licenses and so forth, it should come out of the hands of the police and put into a competent agency. And we're not seeing that, but I do know there are situations where folks just purchase their licenses, and so they don't know when to stop, they don't know the road signs, and they just go in their vehicles and they just press their gas, and that's it. I don't know if you see that as a problem too in terms of the licensing.
I wouldn't use a strong word like misuse of the police, but if you go to the trouble to train a police officer at police training school, you don't just want him to check if the lights are working, or you know, or if the vehicle, if the tires have sufficient pressure. I think that could be done by a civil agency. Put the trained policemen on the streets in the areas that they are most needed. And if you can identify 6 areas, for example, 19 Road on Region 6, or West Bobbies Road, or East Demerara Road, or West
Or the
Demerara Road,
Linden Highway.
Linden Highway, put them there on motorcycles and let them pick up people who tend to speed, and get them off the road. If they're private drivers, if they are, people who are habitually drunk, get them off the road. And similarly, if you're at a car park and you see a driver of a vehicle, drinking excessively for 2 or 3 hours, as soon as he leaves that car park, check his breath. So it's a question of enforcement, and much of the enforcement has to be done by uniformed police, and let the clerical work, the registration and the inspection, be done by civilian employees. Right now, a lot of trained policemen are tied up with court duties, moving files from one room to the next. They're tied up with bureaucratic functions. And I sometimes wonder how many trained policemen are doing jobs for which they are not trained, clerical jobs. So this is something we need to look at, but enforcement requires boots on the ground. Enforcement requires police officers being present at the scenes and the sites of most of these offenses. And the offenses don't take place in the offices or Stabrook Square. They take place on the roadways in Region 4, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and particularly in Region 10.
All right, well said, President David Arthur Granger, with us this evening on Anansi Web Education. We're talking about road fatalities. How do we reduce it? And it is sad that, especially when members of one particular family is being just wiped out as a result of a reckless driver, a drunken driver, or whatever. It is definitely sad. As we move on to our next question here this evening, is why have coastal villages been the scene of so many fatal road accidents? Mr. Granger?
Well, the coastal villages used to have, from colonial times when sugar was king, front dams. They had back dams, but the front dam was actually just a dam to keep the sea out. And eventually, over a period of time, these dams became public roads. So, because of the nature of development, people gravitated to those public roads for entertainment and markets and shopping, and they were never really developed as highways. They were always like social gathering places where people would go on Saturday afternoon. The boys and girls would hang out, and of course, entertainment spots, rum shops, and so on would spring up there. So what happened is that these so-called public roads were actually improved, around the time of independence by the PNC administration, and they were given really superior road surfaces, and this encouraged speeding. At the same time, the quality of vehicles had improved. Not the old time, trucks and Morris Oxford and so on, but people were driving.
Or the tapirs.
Yeah, or tapirs, which is a typical vehicle for East Berbice only. I don't think I've seen it in any other region.
Yeah, yeah.
But the reason is that these coastal villages, all the way up to Supernam and Charity, up to now, we still get a lot of accidents in Region 2. They were really never designed for the volume of traffic that they are now required to bear. And I haven't been in the countryside for a long time, but I know the practices of driving muddy farm vehicles, harvesters and tractors onto the roadways, drying paddy. Sometimes you see huge herds of cattle, and sometimes the cattle will just be left straying, and a black cow and a black road and a black night would be a recipe for an accident, and this tended to happen on the coast quite a lot. So most of the people live on the coast. Most of the deaths occur on the coast, and most of the villages where these deaths occur are really on the coast. So the village is an important element in understanding the road deaths, and it must be an important element in the solution to the road deaths. It's not something we could ignore. So there must be something in the village which helps to keep the residents of those villages safe, because there is a danger now. And whenever a vehicle hits somebody in a village, some relative is, these villages are not from somewhere else. Some relative is hurt, some family is hurt. And it is a collective responsibility of the NDC, the neighborhood, a collective responsibility of the region to make sure that the residents are safe. So the coastal villages are at risk, and the coastal villages must be made ready to protect the residents from that risk. And it's just because of the historical development of those public roads that people are now using them as speedways. And that is a pity, that's a tragedy. And we need to recognize the historical significance of those public roads and make them more safe.
Well said. This, as I reminisce my days on the quarantine, we would ride our bikes, and of course, we would use the road, the public road, and we will first look either to the west, and we hardly see any cars, any trucks, any bus, or nothing coming in. And that's a long stretch. And that's when we know we can go on the road, ride our bikes, play cricket, whatever it is, or even do a sprint. At that time, I was the fastest guy in the quarantine. I think that's where Usain Bolt got his stuff from. But and these days, every second there's a car. Every second there's a car. And then there's the houses on both sides and so forth. One of the other things that caused some problems that you did mention, the fact that drying paddies on the road, students, you're coming home from school, you got to walk on the road itself, because those farmers, they decided to take up, those rice farmers, the entire stretch of the road wherever they're drying paddies. And then there were the fishermen that dried fishes and what is it, shrimps, dry fish on the road. And then there are people who just put all of their belanje bags and everything on the road. Those things happen. And that contributed a great deal to a lot of accidents as well. Or even in the mornings, they had those trucks driving with bags of okra, belanje, and it falls on the road as well, 1 or 2 bags, and another driver just, so there are lots of things that contributed to the road fatalities over the years. And we've got to address it, because lots of lives have already been snuffed out. Young people, lots of our young people in their prime have been snuffed out. And we've got to find a solution for it. The final question for today, and sorry, not the question, but this was back in October. We just gave a rundown as to question for today's show of Anansi Web Education. How could, Mr. Granger, how could children in villages be protected from fatal road accidents? How could those folks be protected?
Well, first of all, we have to understand the problem. We cannot save our children simply by blaming the police or calling for another operation. We've had every variety of, Operation Safe Road, Operation Safe Way, Operation White Knight, Operation, Make the road safer. These things don't work. They will not work if they're top down. If you get some officer, at the divisional headquarters stating that we have launched another operation, it must come from the people who suffer most. That is the parents and the teachers in the schools and in the homes, in the villages. And I would recommend that there be some form of parents association. I would like to make reference to a well-known civil society group called Mothers in Black, which called attention, maybe because the founder of that organization lost a daughter by careless road driving. And every Friday they would meet outside the Parliament building and picket and call attention. And they were responsible, I am sure, for getting the government of the day, the PPP administration, to make the use of helmets mandatory, make the use of seatbelts mandatory, and to make the use of breathalyzers. But I mean, they could do so much and no more. And unfortunately, many of the efforts were ignored. But we still need to have speed guns so that in those stretches of roadway, particularly through villages, and this is something that should be put in the hands of the neighborhood democratic councils. When you speak of community policing, when you speak of neighborhood policing, this is what happens on the ground. No point sending somebody from Georgetown to enforce the law. What we need are people in that particular region, people from Tallahassee or people from Wim, getting on the roads and ensuring that the roads are well marked, they're signed, well lit, and that if there's a practice or convention for herds of cows to be moved from place to place, that the roads are made safer because of the use of flags. If vehicles pass through there with timber or building materials, the vehicles have to be properly screened, make sure they don't speed. And there must be, you see, when we think of local government, we don't just speak about, budgets and all that. We speak about the involvement of villagers. And I'm not going to get into who is president or chairman of the NBC. What we need are the interested members of any community, African or Indian or of any ethnic group, to sit down around the table and accept that our children are dying. Nobody does an analysis about how many Indians are killed or how many Africans are killed. Children are being killed on the road. Guyanese are being killed on the road. And it is a common responsibility of the RDCs and the NDCs and of the regional police authorities. And this is one of the things that the APNU AFC administration did. They regionalized policing so that the police divisional commander has greater authority and autonomy, and he must trigger real community policing by speaking to the people in the community, the schools, the families. How can we make your village safer? And the whole idea is to protect children, not to facilitate, trucks or stand trucks or timber trucks, not to make roads faster for speeding vehicles, not to hold racing events or horse racing, but to make the roads safe for children. And what I'm saying is that at the bottom level, there must be some action on the part of civil society. Every village should have a road safety component. Every school should have a road safety component. Because losing 3 people a week in Guyana is unsustainable. And that is the cost of road accidents in Guyana. We lose 3 young Guyanese citizens every single week. And for the year already, 2023, we've already lost 122 citizens. And this is what needs to be understood at village level, that these people are mostly young villagers, and we could prevent such a loss of life if we took action at the community level.
Well said, David Otto Granger, former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. You did mention Mothers in Black and their efforts. It's sad that a lot of things that they brought to the attention of the then regime fell on deaf ear. And Mothers in Black came about, they came into existence as a result of a mother. And a lot of those members, they lost their loved ones on the roadways. But particularly the head of that organization, she lost her daughter, Alicia, on the Rupert Craig Highway. And so as we reflect on road fatalities and organizations that have attempted to play a role in terms of asking governments to make changes, sadly, we see a lot of these things are being fallen on deaf ears, especially as of today. You did mention that at the start of this year, over 120 something persons have already died as a result of road accidents, and most of those folks are young people. We need to, or villagers, people within the communities need to stand up as well and speak out when they see speeding drivers, when they see things on the roadways that can cause accidents. It can be either your neighbor, it could be you, and nobody wants that for any young one or any life to be lost, snuffed out unnecessarily on the roadways. It's got to stop. And this is why today we have dealt, as we reflected back and occurred October of 2007, 10 persons were killed in Amelia's Ward. In October 2010, 12 persons were killed on number 19 Village Public Road, that's on East Berbice Quarantine. And with that same quarantine, number 19 Road Highway, kudos to your administration again, Mr. David Granger, because had it not been for the vision that you guys had then when you were in office to ensure that road fatality, you address how should that or how do we find ways to reduce road fatalities. And one of the best things that you guys did with that in regards to that is to head out on the quarantine highway. And you did say, look, it got to be lights. And for 20 something years, that road, people who talk up much that they care about people, they ignored lights on that stretch. And just a few months in office, you guys were able to correct that. And to this day, we hardly see or hear any accidents on the on the East 19 public road on the quarantine. The same for Linden. You guys had that very approach to ensure that there are lights throughout the Linden Highway. We now have billions of dollars oil revenue, should be doing more. You guys did without oil revenue. And anyways, we've come to the end of today's program on Anansi Web Education. Mr. Granger, thank you so much, though, for your time, unless you have another minute to close off with something you so wish to. Go ahead.
It's always a pleasure to be on this program, and this, like other programs on the Anansi Web Education, are concerned with human life, and particularly for life in the villages. Regardless of the ethnicity of the villagers, we're talking about young people, particularly who live there, because the majority of Guyanese still live in villages. And the point I'd like to make on this matter of road deaths is that many of the victims of road accidents are in villages. And to save lives, we must ensure that we put mechanism. We don't just depend on the police administration, police traffic department. We must ensure that the people at the neighborhood level, the village level, are empowered to insist on changes, just like the Mothers in Black was able to do. And we don't want villagers in black, but we need to ensure that people are conscious of the danger. And losing 3 people a week is not the type of country I would like my children and grandchildren to grow up in.
Yep. Thank you so much, David Otto Granger, former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. The other thing that I'd like to see that they take an aggressive approach with is road safety education in schools from nursery to university. Road safety, it is very, very important, and even constant programs on the radio, even in the newspapers and these sort of different things to remind folks about how to use the roads. Road safety is important. It starts with the schools as well and in the villages as well. But different times you're living in now. Mr. Granger, thank you so much for your time here this evening on Anansi Web Education. We'll see you back next week, same place, same time. Thank you, sir. And to all of our listeners, thank you all as well. Have a great rest of the night. Thank you.
She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For their morning, the day is dawning. For got a crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cock crow, dog a bark, donkey bray, horse and neigh, even duck a quack. Cock crow, dog a bark, donkey bray, horse and neigh, even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country.